Hey guys, I'm Willie McBride, and I'm going to do a quick debrief of the practice race today for the J70 course. So I'll go ahead and pull up my screen here, and oops, cool. So we'll take a look here at some of the racing from today. Here was the start. And what we can see is that at the start, we had several boats who were over early down at the pin down here. A couple teams went back, and a couple teams who were over didn't go back. But what's interesting to look at is that when you look down the line, the thickness of this band represents how dense the boats were on different parts of the line. You can see that quite a lot of boats were fighting for the pin. That was one of the most dense parts of the line. And that was because we had a pin favor. We had 7.3 degrees of pin favor at the gun. And because we had that pin favor and a bunch of boats were fighting it out down there, it was really crowded. But when we look, and we can set this to say if we wanted to be top 10, 30% of the way up the first beat, let's say, what would be the highest percentage spot to start? We see based on how people did from different ends of the line that starting at the pin actually was the most green of anywhere on the line. If you started down here at the boat end, um, it was actually not that much less dense. In fact, the least density was right here, kind of to windward of that pin third. And again, you have a little bit more green there. Not a ton of disparity between where you started and how it turned out, 30% of the way up the beat. But, the best spot was to fight it out down at the pin. And to be one of those boats that started down there at the favored end. And one of the things you can see is you can see several of the boats who jibed out. We'll kind of look at their tracks in a minute. Ended up doing pretty decently on this beat. So we'll just watch this race play out really quick. And one thing that I want to tune into is I want to look at, we've got these guys who are over down at the pin, but were able to flop right away, tack and cross. They didn't go back. And they kind of jump out into the front row, as well as some boats that started down at the boat end. Look at where they started. So smoke and mirrors, third boat down from the boat, basically, and take their position here. And again, kind of jump out into the front row pretty quickly here. So we had boats in the front row starting anywhere on the line. And as long as you kind of got your spot here on port tack, off of the line and had good boat speed, you were in the game here 2/3 of the way up the beat. And now we're starting to look at the approach to the windward mark. So we've got these couple of front row boats, Cake and Odd and Smoke and Mirrors. And all of these boats really have quite a simple first beat. They get off the line, they get onto port, they drag race out here to the starboard tack ley line and one and in. So really a simple beat. But let's go ahead and go back and look at the people who actually moved the most. So we're going to set the start of our time frame here as we come off the line, and we're going to set the end of our time frame here as we get to the windward mark and see who gained the most. And what we see is that the boats who gained the most, here's a couple of them. Smoke and Mirrors was one of them, and we watched they started down at that boat end, kind of started behind because the pin was favored, and they were able to pass a bunch of boats because they just had a clean lane, and were able to go fast. These other two boats over here on the left-hand side, I think are quite interesting to look at. So let's go ahead and replay this stretch. We can see that in this case, both of those boats start behind here. We've got big dogs here who were over at the pin and went back. And then we've got these guys who were behind at the pin. And let's go ahead and watch both of their races. I'm gonna actually select big dogs as well here. Um, and then I actually also want to look at Crester here because I think they're an interesting example of another boat that was over early and went back. So we'll look at these three. And what you can see is that these guys get out to ley line fairly early. They basically start behind, wait for everybody to clear. And at this point, we're halfway up the beat. They're still not looking great, but they have this nice lane out here on the left-hand side. These other two, this I believe is Crester that just tacked, and Big Dogs here, who plays all the way through, even farther to ley line. And so these three boats, the boats that passed the most on this beat, are the three that kind of play this left-hand side. And I think one of the places that they make the biggest gains, so we can see them start kind of working their way up in the fleet. And if I rewind a little bit, you know, at this point, they're all still quite deep. Maybe, almost halfway up the beat. And they make all of these gains. Now they're starting to move. And they make all of these gains fairly late in the beat, especially in this final third. And I think a big thing that has to do with is if we change the color map to look at speed coming into the mark here, you might expect this, but all of them are kind of in this clear air, whereas the rest of the fleet is really battling on this starboard tack ley line. And what you see is you see the a lot of blue over on starboard tack ley line and a lot of yellow over here on port tack ley line. And what that tells me is that these guys over here on port tack ley line are going really fast all the way into the mark at the end, whereas all these boats who are kind of battling on starboard tack ley line are pinching to make the mark. I think that there was some current pushing down today, and that was making it hard to get around that mark. Uh, Actually, maybe I'm wrong on that. Disregard the comment on current. But I think that ultimately the move in this race was to be late on port tack and approaching kind of in clear air, able to keep the bow down, able to go fast. And that made a big difference. Let's go ahead and look at one other thing here. And that is on the downwinds. I'm gonna go ahead and shrink this, and we're just gonna look at the downwind. So let's go ahead and play through. The fleet is turning that weather mark onto the downwind leg, and we'll watch the downwinds play out. And what you can see right here is a lot more yellow on this right-hand side of the course looking downwind, a lot more blue on the left-hand side of the course looking downwind. If we pull up the wind map, a lot more righty on the right-hand side of the course looking downwind, a little bit of lefty on the left-hand side of the course looking downwind. And I think that two takeaways here for me. One is that a lot of the fleet here has to jibe or sails in this righty on starboard jibe for quite a while after the straight set before taking the righty back across the course. So they're sailing the lift for a long time. And then by the time they jibe and get on to port, that righty has largely faded. So they've actually sailed through a phase on this downwind. And the other thing that I see is if we flip over to speed here, the fact that a lot of these boats are going fast over here is also really related to the fact that they're sailing high. So you can see the angles on these boats, they're sailing quite high. And if we then change to VMG, I think that to me, one of the things that I see here is that a lot of the boats who had the best downwinds actually weren't sailing as fast as some of the other boats around them. So even though you see a lot of yellow over on this side of the course, it was often the boats who kind of sailed the low mode, and kept the bow down, who did really well on the downwinds. I believe that Crester here passed more boats than anyone downwind, and we'll watch through what they did. They took the jibe set early. They jibe back in a spot where they're on top of the diamond. So we like to talk about being on the outside of the diamond at the top of the course. So that means being on top of the fleet here as we exit the mark, or on top of the fleet as we jibe set and exit from the mark. And then in the second half of the downwind, being on the inside of the diamond here, where again, we're on top of the fleet, or on the inside of the diamond, where we're on top of the fleet, depending on whether you straight set or jibe set. That's a really strong position to be in. And Crester takes that position here where they have clear air all the way down and in, and ends up passing this whole group over here who has so much yellow in their tracks. They're going really fast. But I think that they sail through a little bit of the right phase, and maybe they're just sailing a little bit too hot on average. Cool. And then the final thing I want to look at is this leeward mark grounding and the tactics of this boat here, Crester, because I think it's an interesting example of how to kind of thread the needle at the end. What we see is that they get to this corner a couple boat lengths above the zone. And as this boat goes to try to duck them, if they let this boat duck, if they let uh two two tatis duck them here, then they're going to be in bad air approaching the mark. So as that boat goes to duck them, they actually jibe to match. And that puts this boat in a really hard spot where they are sailing in bad air and they have to live for several seconds longer before they actually get down to this mark. And what that allows Crester to do here is break overlap as we get close to the zone. They keep it high and they kind of point at the edge of the 3 boat length circle here. And you can see that at this point, they break overlap. When we sight the transom, there's no overlap between the boats. And as soon as they enter the zone and they say, no overlap, we're in the zone here, then they jibe. And at that point, the moment you enter the zone, if you establish no overlap, then you're in a spot where the other boat can't go inside of you. They owe you room. And so they go inside and take that room. Cool. The one other thing I want to look at is just the conditions from the race. Up here in the right-hand corner, we've got the course wind. And what we can see is that at the start of the race, we start the race in about 224. And about halfway down that downwind, it kind of trends to the left, all the way up the first beat and all the way about halfway down that second beat. And this could be another reason why we actually see Crester gain so much on the downwind, and why we saw those boats gain on the left-hand corner upwind is that the breeze basically trends to the left for this whole period, and it kind of maxes out left at this moment at 209. And then from here, it starts to slowly work its way back to the right and get back to basically the same angle that we started the race in, 220, 223, 224, somewhere around there. So it's this long, slow oscillation that over the course of this race, it takes about half an hour, but it ends up going from 220 on at the start to 220 by the finish or something like that. Maybe we see 230 at one point, but on average, kind of around that 220, 223, 225 position. So hopefully that helps explain a little bit of what you guys saw on the race course today. Hopefully that's a couple of things to look for tomorrow. And hopefully that helps with racing. Good luck tomorrow, and I hope you guys have good conditions all week.